Good evening. How is everybody doing? For housekeeping purposes, first of all, thank you EOCF for managing the registration and being a sponsor. Thank you so much. So Ian with the VIP photo booth will be here until 8:30 tonight. So after this is done, if everybody wants to go out and get a photo of Stolen Voices, please do so. Food will be out until the end, cash bar, and then they'll keep refilling if you need. Tonight it's going to be a little heavy, okay? And so if it becomes a little bit too much, or some of the youngins that are here too, feel free and step out, please. And if you need anyone to talk to, tap me on the shoulder, okay? So with that, I'm Michelle Bart. I am the founder and CEO of the National Women's Coalition Against Violence and Exploitation. Most people know us as NW Cave. We've been here almost 2 decades, providing services to crime victims, victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, bullying, and a lot of gun violence recently. We do this differently than any other nonprofit anywhere, let alone here in our backyard. We do this because we're vocal. We do this because we use the media and partner with the media, which you'll see lots of media here tonight, and we are live streaming this as well. Because it's imperative that whatever we didn't do in the 1970s and what we did wrong, we're still doing that today. But it's a little bit more different today because of social media. NW Cave we were introduced to Star Lara, who you're going to meet tonight, in 2009, years before we were a nonprofit. She needed a website for Jamie Grissom, her sister, who went missing on December 7th, 1971. I didn't ask how we were going to do it. I didn't ask who was going to pay for it. I know coding, so I did it. And Star has been family to my mom, Donna, and myself ever since. But our hands are tied, no matter what we do as a nonprofit. If the system fails, there's nothing we can do for our clients. And this case is one of those cases. Over the years, we've held vigils, and then we'd go to beaches. Jamie loved Christmas. AC Marriott is now open, and beaches is closed. So we held a vigil here last night with over 20 people, the largest we've had in a long time. The Christmas ships will be going by later. It was apropos that we would be here. And I just happened to be at another event yesterday all day, here in this room. And I said, what if we just make a whole weekend of it? And that's what we did. And I don't see Sunny here, but Sunny from AC Marriott has done a bang-up job. Tanner, who was also at Beaches, who heads up all the food here, have done a bang-up job. We've had numerous meetings with law enforcement and the vigil, and then this, and it's been a wonderful place to bring to light something like this. Now, NW Cave is known for media. We have done many film screenings. We've never done a listening screening. But we have a hidden agenda. Well, actually not anymore because it's being telecast. Hashtag Warren Forrest with 2 R's. You're going to hear all about this Clark County employee who took too many lives. But over 50 years, there's other people that have been impacted by what he's done. And he's only serving 2 life sentences for 2 of the cases. And many of those families are here today as well. We've gone through trials, which you're going to see and hear about, like Martha Morrison. At that point, during that long trial, I met Norma, the survivor, one of only 2. You're going to hear from her. We want you to blast this event. We wanted 50 or 75 people. We sold out 3 times. We had 152 people. This is not a fundraiser for NW Cave. Nobody would want to do this as a fundraiser. We charge to get you in your seat because when people pay, they show up and look at this room. Secondly, we need you. Investigators, this team you're going to meet throughout the night, Dan Tilkin, which I can't say enough about, from doing all the media he did on this case, and Star Laura, who kept it in the news over and over again, is why this podcast came to be. And now it's making national news. That's what media does. There's a lot of people in this community that will say, well, why are you so, relevant? What does NW Cave do? Half of what we do you don't even know about. But when you're watching the news, chances are we're behind the scenes. That's what we do. Because media needs to matter. So with that, I'd like to say that throughout tonight, you're going to hear a lot. It will be heavy on your heart. We have tissues around the room. But you're going to find out that we need you and all of your networks to make sure that Warren Forrest in prison knows what we're doing. And we're going to come out with a contest, and you'll hear about that at the end. You're going to meet Paul Holes from the Golden State Killer case. We want to name Warren Forrest. So we're going to have a contest because he's pushing 80 years old, and we want to make sure he can tell us where all of these victims are before he leaves this earth. So we do have an agenda. And however you take it from me or any of them, we owe it to these teenage girls from the 70s that Clark County forgot about. Because we didn't. And we thank you for being here. So we're going to ask you to turn off your phones or put them on airplane mode. At the end, all of them will be around to take photos with you, sign books if you have books of Paul's, pictures out there with them, whatever you'd like. But for now, we ask that you please silence it. We also ask everyone that gave us an email address received a couple emails with the link. We ask that you go and subscribe to the podcast, Stolen Voices of Dole Valley, on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you listen to your podcasts. Rate the show. Review the show. Because today, true crime podcasts are huge. But no matter how big they can be, if we're not bringing accountability and justice to the victims, Listening just doesn't do it. We need to be working together. Please be aware that we are filming this event, and it is live stream. KXRW is with us as well as K2. We thank all of the media for all the work that they've been doing for us. They've had a lot of we've had a lot of airtime on this podcast in the last couple weeks, and we thank the media. So, without further ado, we are going to play a little bit, and then I'll welcome the team to introduce themselves to you. And now please welcome the team that brought you Stolen Voices of Dole Valley, Carolyn Osorio and Brandon Morgan.
Evening, everybody. Welcome. I'm Brandon Morgan. I'm the producer of the show, Stolen Voices of Dole Valley. This is my producing partner, journalist, host of the show, writer of the show. The show exists because of her. This is Carolyn Osorio.
Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight with us. So we're reading from our script. Sorry, we have a lot to cover, and we want to get to the Q&A, so bear with us. It'll get everybody on the same page about the case. But this is our first true crime listening event of Stolen Voices of Dole Valley, the new 9-part investigative series that digs into the long-buried crimes of a Washington State serial killer most have never heard of, Warren Forrest. The purpose of which is to shine a light on his evil deeds. But before we get to the light, we must plunge into the darkness.
Don't be scared. We're here. Safe place.
Unlike these vulnerable young women who were alone, having no idea that a predator was on the loose.
You always have hope that maybe it's not as bad as it seems to be.
I knew I was going to die that day. You don't know what a monster looks like until it's too late.
He was this young, good-looking, charismatic guy in a blue van.
When he put the knife to my throat, I thought, this can't be happening to me.
He ties up one lady, smacks her around, tells her not to go nowhere.
She somehow managed to escape.
One police officer didn't believe me. I was abducted by a serial killer. It's no big deal.
There were multiple victims.
Some didn't survive and some did.
He'd seen a woman all bloody and tied to a tree, screaming, "Someday someone's going to find her remains."
It's beyond what you would see in a horror movie. Buries her alive.
She literally crawled out of her grave.
I got pictures in my mind that I'll never get rid of.
6 to 8 teen girls, young women that disappeared.
And you're like, well, that's serial killer stuff.
Warren Forrest wasn't on their radar at all.
From the beginning, the ball got dropped.
This guy's clearly disturbed, sexual, sadistic, homicidal tendencies.
If you're dangerous and you're killing people, you need to go away.
He had a reign of terror for at least 4 years that nobody knows about.
Cases that are 50 years old.
All these families waiting for justice and waiting for answers.
Being a detective is not a precise science.
We're not done. All these years with all these bodies attributed to him in a no man's land.
The story was going to die. No one was ever going to tell it.
It has to be told.
Your podcast is definitely helping push this investigation.
Justice needs to be given to the voices that he silenced.
Killers. You never forgive them for what they've done to your family.
You gotta do the right thing, even if it pisses everybody off.
So we wanted to take a moment to have a moment of silence for Jamie Grissom, Barbara Derry, Diane Gilchrist, Gloria Knudsen, Krista Blake, Carol Valenzuela, Martha Morrison, because it is for them that we are here tonight.
So, though convicted of only 2 murders, Warren Forrest is suspected in at least 5 unsolved disappearances and homicides from the 1970s. For decades, justice has remained elusive, leaving families trapped in an unending cycle of grief and unanswered questions. But now, finally, that silence is breaking. At 76 years old, Warren Forrest has spent more than 50 years behind bars, yet justice for his victims remains incomplete. Forrest targeted women he thought that no one would miss. Half a century later, those voices are still demanding to be heard. The work isn't over, and time is running out. But before we get to those conversations, in a case that spans more than 50 years, we need to go back to the beginning, to the early 1970s, and a serial killer preying on women in Clark County. But no one's connecting the dots.
It's actually affected my whole life. That somebody could take a 15-year-old child and terrorize her, tie her to a tree, abuse her, and what kind of a freak could do that?
In July of 1974, a 15-year-old girl named Norma Jean Countryman chewed through the rope that bound her to a tree deep in the woods of Washington State.
I used my front teeth to saw on the rope in my mouth.
It was either that or die at the hands of an unknown serial killer prowling the Pacific Northwest in the early 1970s.
It was pretty traumatic. She, literally crawled out of her grave. It was just a miracle that she survived.
The Stolen Voices of Dole Valley is a new podcast that will take you on a journey that spans more than half a century and chronicles the horrible deeds of a serial killer who's only been convicted of 2 murders, but he's suspected of many more.
If he had done 2, you would have thought maybe there's another one in that area.
Crimes committed by a man with a knack for escaping justice. And our investigation exposed consistent shortcomings on the part of law enforcement.
If I'd gone up to that place in the next couple of days, I would have seen that man. Because if I had, a couple more ladies would be alive.
A victim who was dismissed.
The people that she should have trusted didn't believe her. How horrible.
Crucial leads that went uninvestigated, and important evidence that went missing.
I could not make that detective believe me. Even though I had given him everything, he had already dismissed me as a juvenile delinquent. When he said, "I don't believe your story," I just shut down.
Stolen Voices of Dole Valley is a story of callous murder, but also incredible survival.
That's what I'm an advocate for, are the victims who don't have voices anymore, the ones that have never been found.
But there is hope. A dedicated team of investigators who refuse to give up now have science on their side.
We definitely want to pursue DNA evidence.
We know this guy is a serial killer, so they may be one of these suspected victims, or they could be a victim that we have no idea he killed.
From Pie in the Sky Media, KSL Podcasts, and Lemonada Media comes your next true crime obsession. A serial killer you've never heard of. Victims and survivors you won't be able to forget.
Whoever she is, even if it's not my sister, her family is agonizing over who she is, and she was killed by the same killer who murdered my sister.
Follow Stolen Voices of Dole Valley wherever you listen to podcasts.
So there's so many twists and turns in this case. We researched it for more than 2 years, but we don't expect you to know every detail. But if you haven't already, please listen to and share the podcast. And tonight we're going to take you on a brief visual and audio journey of this 50-year investigation. It's suspected that Warren Forrest's 3-year murder spree in Clark County began with the disappearance of Jamie Grissom. 54 years and 1 day ago today, on December 7th in 1971.
So Jamie's remains have never been found, but some of her belongings were recovered in Dole Valley 5 months after she disappeared. Barbara Derry is suspected of being Warren Forrest's next victim. Barbara Derry's murder
Not
is...
long after Barbara left Eileen's place, she was murdered. And the nightmare would begin.
And then we were watching the news, and there she was on the news.
That's Jonna, Barbara's niece, who was just 5 years old when her aunt was murdered. Eileen is Jonna's mother. But what came next would be seared into Jonna's memory.
And what did your mom... What do you
She
remember?
just started screaming and crying, and she was so mad. Probably seen her cry maybe 3 or 4 times my whole life, and that was one of the times.
That night, when Eileen and Jonna were watching TV, that's where they learned that Barbara had been identified as the grist mill victim.
And as a little kid, do you remember that day?
I remember it just scared the hell out of me that she was like that, because she just was never like that. And she wants to know what happened to Barbara.
So Barbara Derry's murder is still unsolved. And in May of 1974, 2 more teenage girls went missing. Diane Gilchrist and Gloria Knudsen. Gloria's murder is still unsolved, and Diane is still missing. When Krista Blake disappeared in July 1974, no one suspected there was a serial killer operating in Clark County. No one knew that Clark County Parks employee Warren Forrest, who drove a sky blue Econoline van, was hiding in plain sight. No one knew that Warren Forrest kidnapped and murdered Krista and then buried her in a shallow grave on Tukes Mountain.
A week later, Warren Forrest kidnapped Norma Jean Countryman. He also brought her to Tukes Mountain and hog-tied her between 2 trees, 169 feet from where he'd buried Krista Blake. But Norma chewed through her bindings to escape Warren Forrest. After Norma's courageous escape, when she told law enforcement what had happened to her, she wasn't believed. And Warren Forrest was free to go on killing. He murdered Martha Morrison, leaving her body out in the wilderness of Dole Valley. Warren Forrest is also suspected of murdering Carol Valenzuela, whose skeletal remains were recovered near Martha Morrison's in Dole Valley.
A couple months after Warren Forrest murdered Martha Morrison and is suspected of killing Carol Valenzuela, he abducted a woman known in the Stolen Voices of Dole Valley podcast as Susan, the Lacamas Lake victim. Susan barely survived Warren Forrest. He'd left her for dead in a shallow grave. From the podcast, this is Detective Bob Songer. And kind of, I'm sure cases in your long career, stick out, and this had to be one of those cases. Can you kind of like slow it down and just like you walk through the door, and would you recall what the details of what that was like?
He looked in bad shape.
You're tearing up now. People can't see this, but you literally just went from the sheriff to maybe a father, a brother, like
Right.
tear.
He was in bad shape. Excuse me, throat cut. But she was able to talk, which was fortunate, and actually pretty brave. Yeah.
What
And,
is it about what is it about what you are recalling right now that's bringing up this emotion? I mean, I can imagine.
I can see her face to this day in the condition she was in. That poor little gal will have scars the rest of her life, not only physical, but mental scars. She went through hell and back, and she's fortunate to be alive. And because of her sharpness and being able to describe what went on during her ordeal, and description of him, his vehicle, what was inside, description of the knife, air gun, all of that. You couldn't ask for a better witness. You were spot on.
But unlike Norma, Susan was believed.
There's a guy that drives a blue van, and he has keys to that gate, and he lives out in Battleground. His name was Warren Leslie Forrest.
At long last, the blue-eyed blue van driver has a name. Warren Leslie Forrest.
The adrenaline rush. We knew we had him.
The search and arrest warrants were authorized early that morning. It was around 6 a.m. when officers swarmed the outside of Warren Forrest's home.
It was like Christmas. We're finding evidence, a knife, the pellet pistol, findings that he used. And when we got into that van, here's all this evidence. And it was backing up everything she had said and corroborating it. And then to find the box in the garage with her purse and identification in, to put the icing on the cake.
Warren Forrest was arrested for his crimes against Susan.
By 1974, Warren and Sharon had a second child and had bought a house of their own. Sharon shared that Warren was a loving and attentive father.
He was a good father, a really good father, a good husband. When he was born, he took a week off. He stayed home, he changed her, he made meals, he cleaned the kitchen.
Sharon is talking about Warren Forrest, the same man who had left Susan for dead in a shallow grave at Lacamas Lake Park. The same man who afterwards drove home, cleaned out his van, stashed Susan's belongings in his garage, and then tossed a football with the next-door neighbor. After which, he went inside the house and ate a TV dinner on the couch with his wife and little girls, who were 1 and 3 years old. Then he went to bed at 10 p.m. But early the next morning, everything would change.
They searched the house the morning that they arrested him, and they woke the babies up and went through everything.
As Warren was handcuffed, he didn't say a word to his wife. He locked eyes with Sharon for a moment before he was escorted out of the house and into the squad car.
For reasons that are still unclear, a judge found Warren Forrest not guilty by reason of insanity for his crimes against Susan, and he wasn't charged for what he'd done to Norma. Warren Forrest was then committed to Western State Mental Hospital.
So not long after Warren Forrest arrived, another young woman, a fellow patient, Karen Wiles, was found murdered 10 miles away on the Tide Flats in Tacoma. Even though Karen Wiles' murder was similar to Warren Forrest's M.O., rope was found at the scene and evidence that she had been hog-tied and strangled. Still, Warren Forrest was not investigated as a suspect or person of interest in her death. Karen's murder is still unsolved. 2 years after Norma Jean Countryman chewed through her bindings to escape a serial killer, Warren Forrest was at Western State, where not only does it appear he had unprecedented privileges, but it was believed he was having at least one relationship with a staff member, had access to a vehicle, and was able to free-range the grounds when a horrific discovery was made.
July 11th, 1976. Hikers James and Michael slipped into the shade of the heavily wooded forest of Tukes Mountain. The men followed a trail that wound near the spot Warren Forrest had carried a hog-tied Norma Jean Countryman nearly 2 years before.
And further, they noticed a shoe on the surface of the ground, that when the shoe was kicked, they noticed that it was attached to a bone, and further that upon this find, they made immediate contact with the Clark County Sheriff's Office.
And that the forest floor surrounding the protrusion was slightly sunken. Putting 2 and 2 together, they realized they were standing on a shallow grave.
During the excavation process, Detective Davidson was able to observe that the victim was lying on her right side with both legs bent behind the deceased's back. A small piece of rope similar to a baling-type twine was located on the deceased's mid-back area where the arms and legs met.
After the excavation of the body had occurred, Detective Mike Davidson looked to reports of missing persons. He discovered that 2 years before, a mother had filed a missing persons report on her daughter, 20-year-old Krista K. Blake.
The recovery of Krista's body was a turning point that led to Warren Forrest, his blue Econoline van, and also an epiphany. Was there a serial killer operating in Clark County? And ironically, as law enforcement was coming to terms with that realization, they discovered that Warren Forrest was trying to get out of Western State Mental Hospital, because after just a few years, hospital staff had signed off on a conditional release. But thankfully, that didn't happen. Warren Forrest would be charged and convicted of Krista Blake's murder in 1979. But what about all the other unsolved cases? They went cold for decades, until Lindsay Arnold was assigned as a detective at the Clark County Sheriff's Office and was troubled by the unsolved cases believed to be connected to Warren Forrest.
He starts to tell me, oh, he's good for, a bunch of different ones. And that really was the hook for me was, what do you mean he's good for a bunch of other ones? Really, the rest was history once you start finding this guy was, in that word, serial killer. He had killed multiple women or had been believed to have killed multiple women. I thought, we need to find out something. And another hook on that was Star Laura had always been in contact with Rick Buckner, and when Rick left, there was kind of a transfer between Rick and I with Star, and then I started to learn more and more about Jamie Grissom and the stories of the rest of the gals too.
Lindsay's passion and dedication for justice for the victims changed everything. She started a cold case unit, and with the help of retirees like prosecutor Denny Hunter and investigator Doug Moss, they began doing an evidence case review. Meantime, Starr connected with investigative reporter Dan Tilkin, and together they would do remarkable things, which included finding the lost remains of the unidentified victim we now know as Martha Morrison, whose bones weren't lost. They were misplaced in Carol Valenzuela's murder box.
In 2012, Starr had an epiphany. What if the Dole Valley Jane Doe was her sister?
I emailed Detective Buckner and I said, how about digging up this unidentified girl and doing a DNA test? He immediately called me and he said, Star, we don't have her remains. I said, what do you mean you don't have her remains?
Starr called the one person she had come to trust in these matters implicitly, Dan Tilkin.
She tells me that she's been trying to get the sheriff's office to get those bones, do a DNA sample on them, compare it to her own DNA, and figure out if that's Jamie. Well, then the sheriff's office lost the bones, and Starr was absolutely beside herself. What do you mean? How do you lose a body? I call the sheriff's office, and they admit to me that they've lost the bones.
Once the unidentified Jane Doe's skeletal remains were recovered, after more than 40 years, she was at long last identified through genetic genealogy as the missing Martha Morrison. This identification led to another murder charge against Warren Forrest, because after the cold case unit was reconstituted, a blood spot on the handle of Warren Forrest's dart gun, which was still in evidence after more than 50 years, was tested, and the blood belonged to Martha Morrison.
A huge part of the prosecution's case was the physical evidence. Martha's blood found on Warren Forrest's dart gun.
Law enforcement came up, and they found Martha's remains. Her skeleton was labeled as Jane Doe for almost 41 years before she was finally identified as Martha Morrison, thanks to advancement in DNA science. DNA has also identified her killer. Almost 50 years ago, the defendant, Warren Forrest, murdered Martha Morrison.
But would it be enough to convince the jury?
The only evidence that we have is that presumptive blood stain on the butt of the dart gun. So what does that mean? It doesn't necessarily tell you the cause of death.
After just 90 minutes of deliberation, the judge read the jury's verdict.
We, the jury, find the above-named defendant guilty of the crime of murder in the first degree.
But what about the other stolen voices? Right now, there are at least 5 unsolved missing and murder cases in Clark County waiting for justice. Jamie Grissom, Barbara Derry, Diane Gilchrist, Gloria Knudsen, and Carol Valenzuela. Well, we have some exciting developments since the launch of the podcast, and we're going to go over them tonight. So let's get started. It's my pleasure to introduce to you our moderator, Dan Tilkin. Dan, come on up here.
Brandon really wanted to call him Dan the Man.
Yeah, I wanted to do a WWF thing, but I
There you go. Thank you all for having me. So I used to work for Channel 2 for 16 years. Then I went over to Channel 6 for 10 years. And then I retired 2 years ago. This story is probably the thing I'm most proud of in my entire 30-year career. It was an uphill battle with Star. And I think it's my greatest accomplishment as a journalist. So this is a big deal for me to be here, so I appreciate it. We're going to have some Q&A in a little bit, but I want to introduce, obviously, Star on the far left there. We have one of the strongest people I've ever met in my entire life, Norma Countryman. You know those two. And on the far right here, we have a man who's come to a little bit of fame through being very, very involved with the Golden State Killer, solving that. His name is Paul Holes. And I'm doing this a little out of order because I know Lindsay has to leave. Lindsay Arnold is in the very back row, and sitting next to her is Denny Hunter, who prosecuted the 1979 case. And Lindsay and I have presented to two groups of police officers about this case, and I feel like I have an imposter syndrome, because those two back there did so much heavy lifting and pushing a rock up a hill to get it to the point that where other people could take it over. And without those two, nobody is sitting here today and gotten as far as we have. So I think they deserve a big round of applause. So Star, we've heard a little bit about how you and I met each other. I'll never forget it. I worked for Channel 2, but I was at the Columbian at the time, at a bureau in the Columbian, and I did this news story about what we turned out to be the Fly Creek Jane Doe. And I get back to my desk, and my phone rings. And it was hard for people to find the phone number at the bureau. And I got this phone number, and it's her. And she says, "Hi, my name is Star Lore, and I think that's my sister." I'm like, "Excuse me?" And so that started this 20-year-ish odyssey. I still don't know what year it was, 2004, 2005, 2006, somewhere around that time. I wish I'd saved everything. I've had friends at K2 go through archives for me trying to figure out when this odyssey started. They've all come up empty. It's on my list to go back there someday and see if I can convince them to have access to the archives. So I don't know when this actually started, but Star and I have been through a tremendous amount. We have a video showing Star's very special bond that only sisters can have.
My first name is Star with 2 R's. Jamie was my sister, Jamie Grissom.
Star and her older sister Jamie were essentially Irish twins, just 13 months apart. Star was 3 and Jamie was 4 when they became wards of the state. In the summer of 1971, after being separated for a year, Star and Jamie went to live with a woman named Grace at her farmhouse in Minnehaha, a rural neighborhood outside of Vancouver, Washington. The sisters began to feel hopeful. At long last, with Grace, they were together and dared to envision a brighter future. They had no way of knowing that a predator was lurking nearby.
How close was he to Grace's house?
Less than 2 miles. And when you think of how remote it was, that's pretty close. Back then 2 miles was nothing, And we walked past that a lot, that home.
So from 2004, 5 or 6, whatever it was, Star and I would do stories every once in a while. And it was frustrating because how do you advance a story where there's no information? And then somebody gave me a big treasure trove of documents, and in those documents, it revealed a lot. And I was able to continue to do a story every once in a while. I'll never forget it. I was on the Oregon coast covering, I think, a landslide. Maybe Highway 26 was closed. And my phone rings, and it's Star. and I do not have time to deal with Star right now. I am on deadline. I'm in the middle of nowhere. I can't believe she's actually reached me by cell phone because cell phones weren't that great back then. But I learned, do not ignore Star. And I answered, hey, Star, what's up? Pretending as though I'm not completely stressed out. And she's like, they lost her. They lost her. I said, what are you talking about? They lost her. Star, slow down. What are you talking about? The girl in Dole Valley, the one I think is Jamie, they lost her bones. And I said, what are you possibly talking about? And sure enough, I called the medical examiner's office and the sheriff's office, and yeah, we lost her. And the medical examiner's office was so nonchalant about it, nonplussed. It was very disturbing. As a reporter, I'm in a tough place because you're only as good as your sources. And if you make people upset, guess who doesn't want to help you out in the future? And so I kind of put Star off for as long as I could, but she's tenacious, and hey, she kept calling me back. So finally I realized this is your job, to hold the powerful accountable. And so I started asking questions. And when I didn't get much, it wasn't even cooperation, it was just being pushed off. So I remember that this treasure trove of documents I had, there was a Dr. Snow in there. And Dr. Snow, the remains had been sent to him. So I call Texas. I had this lead in Texas, and I call the crime people in Texas. I think you mean Dr. Clyde Snow. I go, yes. And he's now in Oklahoma. And so I Googled Dr. Clyde Snow, and Dr. Clyde Snow is famous Dr. Clyde Snow. He's been on a lot of different TV shows, and he's involved in the JFK autopsy. He's also involved in trying to prove whether Bush Cassidy and Sundance Kid were killed in Bolivia, I think it is, but very famous guy. And I call him up, and he was in his 90s at the time. He said, yes, I remember that. Like, you remember this from 1980? And he said, can I have a couple days and check my notes? And he called me back, and he said, yeah, I have here a note here. I sent the remains back to Clark County in 1980. So armed with that information, which isn't a lot of information, Star and I shamed the medical examiner into looking again. And they miraculously found the bones, which they didn't announce for quite a while. And when they announced it, they didn't really give the full context of how they found the bones, why they were looking for the bones, etc. It was very, let's call it interesting. We have a story from KATU that I did that kind of encapsulates part of this. It's not the best story because I didn't save most of this. It's the only one I could find.
I remember what she was wearing.
Star Laura's big sister Jamie.
She's wearing a red and white striped blouse with puffy sleeves.
Left their foster mother's house and went to Fort Vancouver High School, but she never came home.
I said, something's wrong.
It was December 7th, 1971. Star was told that Jamie simply ran away.
You know, I just kept staring out the picture window.
Jamie was 16. 6 months after Jamie disappeared, her identification was found right here. It was discovered by a neighbor picking up trash on Dole Valley Road in very remote northeast Clark County. Then, 2 years later, another neighbor walking up this logging road discovered the remains of 2 women. One of them was identified as Carol Valenzuela. The other has never been identified. Clark County detectives have long thought that suspected serial killer Warren Forrest is responsible for the deaths of the 2 women found here. This sheriff's office document says they also suspect that Jamie Grissom is the first victim of Warren Forrest, but they've never been able to match Jamie to the unidentified remains. Star Laura was excited to learn the detective was trying again to match DNA on hair found where the bodies were dumped. When she got the news the crime lab couldn't do it, she urged the detective to re-examine the skeleton itself.
He tells me, Star, there are no remains. I said, what do you mean? He said, they lost him. that was a huge shock to me. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, you know, you gotta understand things were different back then.
The Clark County Sheriff's Office wonders if the remains found here were sent on to the task force investigating the Green River Killer. Maybe they were donated to an anthropologist who used to teach at Clark College. Or maybe they were lost throughout the years when the medical examiner moved its offices. Bottom line, when the detectives searched the medical examiner's evidence room for the remains, they weren't there.
In my mind, that girl, you know, just was connected to Jamie. I don't know if it was her or not, but I can't prove it either way now.
And now, Star Laura has to hope for a break in the case from an unexpected source 40 years later and counting. Dan Tilkin, K2 News.
I really wish we had the very first story we did together, and someday I'm going to find that. So Norma, it took me years to get Norma to talk to me. I called her and I left her messages, and I don't think you ever returned any of my messages. I think I finally met you in person for the first time in court, outside the courthouse, or inside the courthouse, outside the courtroom when he was finally brought back here. 2020, yeah. Does she need a mic? Okay, that's what I thought. Saying you've been through hell is an understatement. How do you find the strength to be here?
It's just who I am. You just don't sit down and cry about it. You just get up and do it. You go on, because what other choice do you have? There's no other choice.
We have a video that talks about her journey a little bit.
It just takes me back to that moment in the woods.
5 decades later, handing the rope to Norma and watching her reaction was brutal.
Holding this in my hands and smelling it and remembering, it takes me back to those 2 trees and the feeling that I had when the rope around my head finally broke and my head rolled off, and what I needed to do next, knowing that if he came back and found me like that. And so I just did what I had to do. When I was chewing on the rope, it was very painful. It was painful because I was also biting my lips. I was rubbing my face against a tree, and the rope was burning the side of my face. The smell it's overwhelming. I can't.
That last picture there of Norma, that was a week after your abduction?
That was the day of my abduction. That was the day of my abduction when the officer took me to the sheriff's department and interrogated me. They also took those pictures.
And your mother had pre-scheduled a family photo with all of you and your siblings.
It was on a Wednesday when he took me, and the Thursday I was found. My brother was home on leave from the Navy, and it was the only time all 7 of us would be together, and she had already scheduled on Saturday for a family photo to be taken because he was leaving on Sunday to ship off to Vietnam or someplace. And I had no choice. We had no choice. We had to go through with the photo shoot. It was traumatizing. It was almost as traumatizing because people want to look at you and ask you questions and wonder what you did to end up like that. And it was hard on my mom, and the harder it was on my mom, the harder it was on me.
One of the mistakes that I would often make in reporting the story, and sometimes I would catch my mistake and sometimes I wouldn't, is I'd always say that Warren Forrest is suspected of, and the number changed a lot. I go back and I'm like, well, that's a different number. Anyway, that he had 7 women who were his victims. You were 15. You were a teenager. You were a kid.
I was.
And I think a lot of people, part of this whole Warren Forrest conundrum is these for kids who he victimized, and that got lost. And I don't think I did a good job in conveying that and reinforcing that. But that's part of his evilness.
It wasn't just that we were kids. Carolyn hit it right on the head. We were throwaways. We were people, girls, young girls, that nobody would ever miss. He never, ever, in his evil mind, considered that we were somebody's daughter, somebody's sister, somebody's mother. We were nothing. We were garbage, just to be discarded, used for his pleasure and discarded. That's where his mindset was.
Star, that's what he thought.
Yes, exactly. Yes, thank you.
I live near where he took you, and every time I drive by there, I look over at that road, and I look over that field, and I think about you and what you went through with your ankles tied and the strength that you found to save yourself. And then you weren't believed. It's just unbelievable that you weren't believed.
It's still very, very difficult for me to live with that today. Especially learning everything that I've learned since then. The very first time I heard the testimony of the Lacamas Lake victim, the one we call Susan, I had never heard her story from her own lips. I was kept out of the courtroom both times that she testified in '79. And when I heard her testify in 2023, the anger just surged because she said exactly the same thing I said. She described him exactly the same way that I had described him just 3 months before. She described the van, she described everything in it, and I had said those exact words. I have lived with guilt 50 years, and I could not make him believe me. And if I had been able to make him believe me, Martha would be alive, Carol would be alive, and that poor young woman would be whole today. There's anger in me even today, 50 years later, about what these people had to go through and what their families had to go through, because I'm trying to be nice here. Some person did not believe my story. He threw me away every bit as much as Forrest did.
When I would go out to Dole Valley and do stories, one of the things I heard several times was from neighbors out there saying they heard screams. Mr. Mattson, who found Jamie's ID, which that story showed, the ID wasn't found right there. It turns out it was found 3 miles to the north. It bugs me whenever I see that. But he was out picking trash with his mother and siblings, and he found her ID. And he talks about hearing a blood-curdling scream. This is sooner, it's a different time of year than when your sister disappeared. So we don't know who he was talking about. But one of the things that the podcast delves into, and we're going to transition here to Carolyn and Brandon to talk about, is Mr. McClure and him stumbling across what potentially is a game changer. Do you want to dive into that?
Yeah, it was a woman that Carolyn found and interviewed, and she shared this, she framed it basically as folkloric with regard to her family. Like it was passed down, over a couple of generations, over 50 years, that this kid, Doug, who was a teenager, and this is a family that were like off the grid. They lived in what, they called a trapper's cabin, right? So they weren't like around technology or around anything, and they had a deep-seated, not hatred, but kind of distance with the police. It's like you don't call anybody, you don't say anything, you keep your mouth shut and you just mind your own business. And Doug, as the story went, was coming home, I guess maybe from hunting or checking traps, whatever, and the way the story went was that he saw a young woman tied to a tree in distress, like screaming for help or whatever. And the story went that he got scared and he ran the other direction home and like told people. And you know, I heard that story and I didn't. To be honest, I didn't believe it. That doesn't really ring true.
Yeah, I had the same reaction when several people told me I'm like,
yeah, you didn't get killed in the comments like I did, though. Okay, right.
I think we have a clip of what caused that. Clip 26.
Yeah.
This is Brandon and I talking about it just didn't make sense, but it sort of made sense, which will become clear. So 26.
It's such an interesting story that I don't believe at all, and I need to be convinced that this kid would see a woman tied up, screaming and bloody to a tree, and not go help her.
But here's
Run back to the house. And now the interesting thing at the end is because they were very secretive about the family business. You don't call the fucking cops. You don't do anything. But it's a human, and he's a human, and you see, and a girl in distress, like that casts a lot of doubt over that story. Okay, interesting that he would actually see someone tied up to a tree and not say, "Oh my God, what happened? Let me untie you. Let me be a human here and get you help."
yeah, but
I'm gonna go tell my family and then come back and you're gonna be gone already. So I don't know a person, and I've known some terrible people in my life. You know, there's that saying like, "I wouldn't piss on you if you were on fire," right? Like if you really hate somebody, like. It's almost like he sees like his enemy and goes, "Ha, you fucking deserved it, bitch," right? Like, who would leave someone there?
I wish that we were like recording this as a bonus episode because I totally hear you. But then again, I also think that when you're 19 years old and you see somebody in these dark woods, you're terrified. Are they still here? You know, am I going to get involved in this if I'm trying to help her? Are they coming back? And you're like, I'm going to go get help.
Hey, what's your name?
I know. I totally. I know. But.
I'll call you.
Does that make you doubt the story? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, it does.
That's why we need to find the guy.
I understand. I get it. I totally get it. Maybe that's why he doesn't want to be found. All right, that was 2 years ago. We cut to today, and there's a lot of developments. But the bottom line is, and I don't kill me in the comments. That's fine. I don't really care. But they kind of echoed what Carolyn was saying, was that, you know, this Brandon asshole, he doesn't understand fight or flight or human psychology or fear or whatever. And they're right. I don't. I'm a storyteller. I'm not a psychologist. But one of the reveals tonight is that they found the guy. They found this who was a kid then, 50 years later, and they asked him the story, and that's not how it went. It was much more in line with how a person would react. He actually found her and went up to her and like tried to, I guess, wake her up, but she was already dead. And he got some of her blood on him. And when he went back to his house, his dad was like, "You idiot! They're gonna think it was you. You've got her blood on you. You got to keep your mouth shut." And so it's obviously more nuanced than that. And this guy he did act like a normal human being and went to help someone that he saw in distress and didn't just run away from it. So it was nice to hear, and you know.
Validation.
Still waiting for an apology from cat number 368. If you're out there, I'm waiting.
He'll wait for a long time, but that's the great thing about the podcast is discussing back and forthing how we approach, this potential witness, the veracity of it, and we were able to share this with the sheriff's office, and they were able to finally we tried finding him and we're not successful. But if you want to queue up 28, here is the latest and greatest about this amazing witness and what this could mean for Star and Jamie.
And so you dropped an incredible bombshell. Right. Tell me about it.
Yeah, well, it was a bombshell that day too. So Wally Steffen decides to go down and hang out in this grocery store. I think it was on the second or third day he's sitting there, and in walks Matt McClure, readily identifiable. He's just wasn't any mistaken identity. And Wally's a pretty easygoing guy, not much of an intimidating person at all. He walks right up to Matt and extends his hand and says, "Hey Matt, how you doing?" And Matt says, "Oh yeah." And Wally says, "You mind sitting down with me for a little bit and having a cup of coffee?" And very calm, very positive, and sat down. I think probably spent at least 20 or 30 minutes with Wally. And the basic question was, "Hey, do you remember back when you were telling your brother and father that you had run across a body?" And he was again kind of cool, calm, and collected, and very detailed. Said, "Yes, I remember that clearly," and basically recounts the story. He remembers that it was in 1971. I'll get down to tacking down the date in a minute. He didn't remember the exact date, and said, "Yes, indeed, I had a argument with his father and his brother, big shouting match." He didn't go into much detail about what the argument was over. And we do know Matt has a drug background. We know that he, as a child, he had a head injury, so he's not always lucid and completely stable. But he was during this interview, and recounts that he ran away from his dad, ran out onto the road, and ran down Dole Valley Road, and at some point ran into the woods. He ran into the woods. He said he stumbled and fell down, and as he fell down, he looks up and sees the body of a young woman.
So let me pause here. So that part of the story, she wasn't bloodied, tied to a tree and screaming. She was dead.
That's correct, and he was quite specific about that, and Wally prompted him a little bit just to try to deal with the discrepancies that we had from the family folklore and what he was hearing. And he said, "No, she was not tied to a tree. There was blood on her body. He reached out and touched her. He was freaked out a little bit because he said he got a little bit of blood on his hands when he touched her, but cold to the touch." And a few other descriptors that I don't want to describe at this point that just led us to believe there's too much detail here to not have some validity to it. He said at that point he just freaked out, I think was his words, turned around, ran out of the woods, ran back up to his dad, and he was completely out of it, just shouting and screaming, "I saw this body," and yada, yada, yada. So much so that he says that they called an ambulance. We haven't had any verification of that yet. I haven't dug into records to see if that's true, but said the ambulance came out, checked him over, calmed him down. He said it was curious to him that they didn't comment or talk about the blood that was on his hand. And then he went on without prompting to explain that as he was calmed down, he kept bringing this up. Like, "Yeah, there's a body down here. There's a body down here." He says his dad pulled him aside and says, "Hey, you need to just shut up about that. They're going to think you're crazy, and if you keep that up, they're going to send you away to a mental hospital." And at that point, he said he just quit talking about it. And again, just we didn't go into a lot of detail about over the years, but for the most part, when he decided to be quiet about it, that was for 54 years that he was quiet about it. No one's ever talked to him about it before. He didn't even, he's been so out of contact with the family, he did not know that his brother Con had passed away. So that whole story about what had happened, Con, his older brother, was there, shared it with Deborah when they got married later in life, shared it a couple of times over the years, and then Deborah kind of feeds it up through the chain. It gets to you, it gets to us. But no one had ever confronted or contacted him in 54 years to find out whether that was a real story or not. So where he went into the woods and where approximately where we think he stumbled and saw the body is a mere 1,500 feet from where the grave sites of Martha Morrison and Carol Valenzuela is located. And that location continues to be, it's about 1.5 miles north of that location where Jamie Grissom's identification was found a few months after she disappeared.
So it's easy to forget, and he says Jamie's name at the end there. You can think about this person in the woods as an object, but it's important to remember we're talking about your sister. And so you're the only one here who knew her, and I know you're holding out hope. You have had quite a few canine searches out there. You've had psychics reach out to you. You've done it all. But Carolyn, can you talk about the thoughts of a new search?
Yeah, what's incredible about this story is that it confirms for Starr that this was most likely Jamie based on his descriptions. She got a call from Doug saying as much, right? So that's something that's amazing. Even if Jamie is not found when we do this search, it's something that Starr has never had. So now Jamie is linked by a witness to warrant for, to the case, the larger case. The other thing is that these coordinates, he told the Doug where he saw, the body, and so now for the first time they'll be able to search that area, which has never been searched before. So coming up, what's really amazing is that they're doing another search and rescue. Fortunately, I've been invited to come along to that, so we'll be filming that. And, having these coordinates, it's been forever, but they have these specialty dogs that are able to smell human remains from, the Civil War. I mean, so it feels like a long shot, but it also doesn't feel like a long shot. And so it's just really exciting that, we could go out there and we could find Jamie,
Let's bring in the last member, far right here, Paul Holes, on this panel. So Paul, again, I remember when we first did this story, I was working at Channel 6, and I remember I came across the news feeds when we ran a story about the Golden State Killer. And I had never heard of him before. And now here I am, standing next to the man who was at the heart of solving this through DNA genealogy. Is that true?
No, that is correct.
Okay, explain what you do.
So, well, I spent 27 and a half years working in law enforcement. I was in a very unusual position that I was initially hired as a forensic scientist, and then my sheriff's office required that once I moved into the criminalistics unit, I had to become a sworn officer. So I ended up going to the police academy, coming back in, and was assigned to the old serology unit, like ABO testing, etc., as well as doing CSI work. But during my training, I worked in all the various forensic disciplines, and then ultimately promoted up way too high, became the division commander, got bored out of my skull, managing the forensic services division. But when I became a sworn officer in 1994, I became fascinated with cold cases and serial predators. So I started digging into my county's unsolved cases. And it just so happens, the East Bay Area, California, back in the 1970s, it was off the hook with serial predators. And the very first case I stumbled across later became known as the Golden State Killer. But I've worked many, many serial predator cases, and in the Golden State Killer case, this was utilizing technology to identify an unknown offender. But I've also worked cases that are similar in this situation where there's an identified offender, but now it's how can we prove that these other cases are tied to him? Then I just happened to be fortunate that not only was I developing forensic expertise, but also investigative expertise in cold cases, and I studied behavioral. So Carolyn reached out to me. I was interviewed, I don't know, it was like a couple years prior, I believe.
Yeah, we about different cold cases. I knew his passion for these cold cases, even though he'd retired. And so, like, every time I thought, okay, I'm going to hit Paul up again here because I think he could help a case that, I was covering in the Pacific Northwest. So with this, the difference here is that when I went to the sheriff's office, my goal was to get them to say that they would bring in a qualified candidate. And I had Paul in mind, and he was only too willing to help with this case, and he helped right away and found some really exciting information.
Well, and so I had never heard of the Warren Forrest case, of course, but as soon as I heard the details, it was like, okay, this is my wheelhouse. And then I had met with the current sheriff's investigators and then ultimately flew out, and we had a very intense debrief, if you will, as to where they were at in their investigation, as well as what kinds of forensic evidence and forensic testing could be pursued. And so we roundtabled. There was a lot of information shared, and some of you here probably know me from the whole true crime genre, the podcasting, the TV show. But I always remind people I come out of real crime, and that's my passion, and I consult on cases. So in this situation with Warren Forrest, I'm wearing both hats. I am consulting with the sheriff's office. I currently am employed as a forensic investigator with the genealogy company Othram. But I'm also was interviewed for the podcast, doing sort of the true crime side. And in this particular case, of course, after 50 years, it's not unusual for evidence to be destroyed either through direct action, because you can think this, Warren Forrest was, in essence, committed to a mental hospital. And so evidence associated with that case eventually, the courts are going to destroy, or the property room through just routine processing is going to get rid of it. And so, of course, I become more and more disheartened as we're talking, and it's like, oh, they don't have this, they don't have that. But what they do have is what they call sweepings from his blue van. And we know Warren Forrest, in many cases, with his known cases, used his blue van in order to be able to abduct the victims, possibly kill some of the victims inside the van. And these sweepings contain about 70 hairs. And so you imagine if you have a victim that is, let's say, bound inside this van, it's possible the victim's hair is present within these sweepings. It just so happens that the type of technology that I used to identify, that my team used to identify Joseph DeAngelo as a Golden State Killer, well, this technology has the sensitivity to be able to get DNA from hair. Now, we've always been able to get DNA from the root of the hair. You forcibly remove your hair from your head, and you see that little white plug. That's tissue. That's a whole bunch of DNA. Where we've always struggled is with hairs that just naturally fall out. These are what we call telogen hairs. It's just part of the life cycle. And you don't have that tissue at the end. And so now you have to kind of resort, or historically resort, to what we call mitochondrial DNA. This is DNA in the powerhouses of each cell. It's very sensitive, but you share the same mitochondrial DNA as your mom, and so on and so forth through the maternal family. So it's not very discriminating. Well, the technology for the genealogy tool that we use to catch the Golden State Killer, which is a completely different type of DNA testing that law enforcement does, it can actually get DNA profiles from these shed hairs or hair fragments that don't have a root. And so this is the exciting thing, is that if we do have a situation where we have identified victims, we have DNA sources from family members of those identified victims, then we can do a direct comparison. But how many victims does Warren Forrest have that we don't know their identities? And so this is where the genealogy tool can come in, where if we get a DNA profile from a hair, and it's not one of the individuals that we think is a Warren Forrest victim, we can now go and identify whose hair that is. Now, with that being said, 70 hairs in an ideal world, you want to test all of them. it is cost prohibitive. I mean, you're literally looking at about $1 million in order to test 70 hairs. DNA testing is extraordinarily expensive. So my role as working with the investigators is to come up with a way to prioritize these hairs as ones that, based off of their characteristics, based off of wherever they were found in the band, etc., which ones are the most likely to produce a result. And so that's what I've been working with the sheriff's investigators. They pursued to find funding in order to be able to test, roughly we're looking at maybe testing about 10 of the hairs initially. And so they're in the process of trying to find funding in order to do the genealogy side. But then yesterday I got an update, and I'm permitted to be able to say this, is that the FBI has stepped up, and the FBI is now seeing what they can do with their forensic resources in order to be able to help prioritize the hairs and initially pursue, at least on some of the hairs, mitochondrial DNA testing to see is there a direct match to any of the known victims. And potentially just having knowing behind the scenes. Once the FBI is involved, the FBI does have resources to do genealogy, in which the company, my employer, Othram, could potentially be the entity that the FBI would send the remaining hairs that need to be tested out of the initial group to see if genealogy can be successful. So there is now sort of a mechanism in place for Clark County Sheriff's Office to try to step through the forensic testing and see if we can find, either show that some of these, let's say, missing girls were in his van, but also identify potential other victims. And part of that is the Valenzuela case, in which her hair mass, while they were out there with searching, they had found skeletal remains that ultimately were identified as Martha, right?
Yeah.
So as they're out there, one of the investigators literally sees this hair mass. It had detached from the skull, and it turns out that hair mass is blonde hair. Well, that's from Valenzuela. So now the FBI has hair examiners that can now take a look at Valenzuela, the victim Valenzuela's hair mass, and see if are any of the hairs out of Warren Forrest's vehicle, do they at least look physically similar? And then of course those hairs will rise in priority, because the Valenzuela case, from an investigative and circumstantial aspect, is the strongest case right now. And if there's physical evidence that does come back to show, yes, there's hairs in Warren Forrest's van that match DNA to Valenzuela, now you have a case that potentially could be charged. And now Warren Forrest could be held accountable for another murder.
So we could continue all night pushing information at you. This time, if you have questions, we'll continue. We can. If you let us, we'll keep talking. But if you have questions, I can come around you and hold the microphone up, and we can get started. We have a question right here in the front row.
Can you go after the deputy that did not believe you? What are your rights?
Can you go after the deputy who did not believe you, she asked.
I really doubt it. It was his opinion. He wasn't held accountable for his opinion. So I don't see 50 years later that they're going to do that. And honestly, I don't care. I feel vindicated. I feel vindicated through all of the information that we have gotten, that I was able to help convict him of Krista's murder by connecting Krista's remains to the Lacamas Lake victim, because he changed his MO after I got away. And that's enough for me. I'm still angry with him. I'm still holding him accountable for Martha, for Carol, and for the Lacamas Lake victim, but I don't think that there's any recourse at all. I can just continue.
Did you listen to the show? So it wasn't just that he didn't believe her. He concocted this whole story. Oh, your boyfriend roughed you up so your parents wouldn't know what you did. Yeah, it was ridiculous. Yeah.
That was it exactly. I was a juvenile delinquent, just trying to get out of trouble.
Another question. Okay, so I should introduce this gentleman here. This is Larry Hellich. Larry is the brother-in-law of Carol Valenzuela. You can either sit or you can stand up so people can see your face. You said they did the same thing to your brother, so this is Carol's husband.
My brother. Yes. When she came up missing, they all they did is focus on my brother. They had him in there every day as long as they could legally. They didn't even open a newspaper. If they would have opened a newspaper, they would have seen all these other girls come up missing. But they didn't do that. Their total focus was on my brother.
As you all probably know, stranger on stranger crime is pretty rare. It's usually somebody that you know. So that would make sense for a while.
Yeah,
Distract them.
Yeah, but other girls that come up missing. Why did they just keep looking at my brother? Why did they just open a newspaper?
Not to put you on the spot, if you don't want to answer this, you certainly don't. But this has, I think, is the right term, put a cloud over your family for years?
Absolutely. Yeah. It destroyed my family.
This is what I mean when I say that there were far-reaching victims. It just wasn't just the young ladies that he took, it was their families. The ripple effect. My daughter was affected by what happened to me. She lived growing up, and especially in her teenage years, with me being a strict mother. And she had never done anything to warrant that. But the ripple effect had that effect on my family, just like it had on Larry's family.
Yeah, I stopped being a child at 14. 10 months out, they found my sister Carol. Someone raped and murdered my girlfriend, Carol Sanders. They found her remains 10 months later after Carol's. And I still have family accusing my brother of this. Families need to communicate. Don't just blow it off, don't walk away. I ran away from it for 50 years because it hurt, and I didn't know how to deal with that. I didn't talk to nobody. I should have. Somebody should have talked to me. Everything was overwhelmed. Carol's parents were trying to take the kids away from Robert. So my mom and stepdad adopted them to keep them in this family. And when that happened, a lot of things changed. They sold all their property. They spent all their money on that. No more family vacations. Which, that meant the world to me because I come from a broken home before my stepdad came into my life. That was important to me. And I lost it all.
One of the themes about this whole situation, and it's why I called him the forgotten serial killer, is because times were different. People didn't talk about this, and once he went away for the murder of Krista Blake, people moved on. Staffing is difficult. People are constantly committing crimes, and he got forgotten about. And families suffered, and Star, when you hit your 40s, you're like, this isn't going to happen anymore.
Right. Something about your 40s.
Yeah. The woman who was attacked at Lacamas Lake, she has never talked publicly. She has testified twice? 3 times?
3 times.
I can tell you, she went on to have a very successful career as an engineer, and she wanted to protect that legacy. She finished her schooling and still lives sort of kind of near here in the region, but again, went on to have a very successful career and wanted to protect that. And so we've all of us, law enforcement, prosecutors, you, me, have gone to great lengths to not share her name. I've almost slipped many times, and knock on wood, I haven't yet. But okay, question, raise your hand. Where's the question? There we go. I'll just hold it.
First, I would like to say I'm so sorry that this happened to you. And thank you for all the people who are working to bring back the voices. And unfortunately, it still exists today. I'm sorry it's been 50 years. That sounds like it should be a long, long time in history, and it still happens today. I do not think that it's your fault that the officer did not believe you. I'm so sorry. With the way that you looked, it is absolutely horrible that you were not heard, and I'm so sorry.
Thank you very much for that. I appreciate it more than you will know. And I have let go of the guilt when I did finally realize, especially after Martha Morrison's trial, when I finally heard the story straight from the Lacamas Lake victim, that there was nothing I could have done to change his mind. He did not do his job. That was the long and short of it. He just did not do his job. He didn't do any investigating. He just wrote me off. He didn't talk to any of the employees. He didn't ask any questions of anybody. That is on him. Completely, 100% on him. And if he were sitting in this audience today, I would look him in the eye and tell him what I thought about him. Because he just didn't do his job.
Oh, she's not done.
So I also think, was that the same representative that heard the testimony of Martha? Because maybe your first story and reporting made them believe her. It's not that she was a better storyteller, was that maybe she reinforced what you said.
The Lacamas Lake victim you're talking about.
I'm sorry if I said the wrong name.
I don't know. I couldn't say. I couldn't speak to that. I think she was believed because she literally crawled out of her grave. I was just a little beat up, young, scared young girl, but she was literally naked, bloody. Yeah, basically. Darts stabbed her throat, almost cut.
I don't remember if it's in the podcast, but people drove past her. She was trying to get help. Bloody, naked.
I believe it was two. Two citizens drove past.
Yep.
Before
Nothing
the
to see her.
shootout.
I'm
Yeah.
going to keep moving on with my day.
Yes, exactly. So I think that the fact that they came to me after they arrested him, after they believed her, they came to me and had me go to a lineup also. That is when they believed me, and that's when I got validation. And it wasn't from Pillsbury. It wasn't from the officer who first came to me. It was from a very wonderful detective. I'll never forget him, Frank Kanakoa. He was my hero.
Oh, one more question.
Just finally, because these are within our local communities, have the names of some of the places been changed? Like Lacamas Lake Park, we don't have that right now. So have they changed the names of some of the locations, or have they been created into communities or paved roads?
As far as I knew, the Lacamas Lake Park was still there. I was just out there.
I know in one of my stories there's a sign that says Lacamas Lake Park. I don't know.
Yeah.
But that is a good point. So many things have changed. Where Mr. Matson, I'm blanking on his first name, took me to where he found Jamie's ID. You would think
it was Ted.
Ted, thank you. When Ted took me to the place where he found Jamie's ID, you think you want to search there, right? Well, here's the road, and then you turn around, and it's solid bushes and trees. You would have to bring in a giant weed. I don't know how you would search that. And then you turn around and you look at this mountain, and you realize what a massive area it is. And then the place where they found Martha's body and Carol's body has changed a lot. There's been clear cuts, logging, a lot of changes that have happened there. Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's right. In my 64 years, I've had way too many stories to tell. I'll try to only tell a few, but longtime family friend, Joni Hutton, her body was just found. I didn't read the details. My sisters don't know the details. I have 3 sisters, you want one? But yeah, I don't think they know. I'm not going to tell them. But she was starved. She was found near a mile within her home. And we all walked and searched, and they didn't do it. About a year. I quit counting the months after so long because I know the odds. But long time, Vancouver, right? This is near Woodland, but I want to encourage you. A mile from our home. Okay, so and then my niece, a bunch of us helped her break up with her boyfriend that had been abusing her. I've seen the signs covering up, and stuff. And but he's out there, Jason. They've heard for Jason to get caught. He killed her, and she happened to have a couple friends over there.
Thank you. We're going to go over here. A lot of questions to get to. Okay.
I wanted to ask Star if she knows why it took so long for them to let you know they found her belongings.
That's a very good question. I wonder that myself, but I'm not sure who I would ask about that. But I think part of it was I was 14 when she disappeared and 19 when they told me. And I just think during that time, I was like her only family, so they didn't maybe want to tell me because I was still a child. That's all the reasoning I can give to that. But it's a good question. Thank you.
Some perspective on life back then. It was told me, I don't know, Denny, if you told me this, or maybe it was a Fred Neiman in the sheriff's office. So Dan, you have to understand that back then, we would show up at a crime scene and there'd be deputies standing around and be like, you're the detective on this. And they didn't have formal training like they do now and have had for years. And they would put evidence in the back of the trunk of their squad car, and they would carry it around for weeks or months. And I thought I was going to be called as a defense witness for his trial because I had done news stories on how they used to handle evidence. And so I thought they were going to call me to the stand and run my news stories with the sheriff's office, talking about chain of custody and how kind of willy-nilly things were, or at least informal they were. But that didn't happen. But it's very, very different. Was it you, sir, the question here? I don't want to knock your coffee over here.
Paul, I know that the D'Angelo person was caught in part related to genealogy, genetic testing, correct?
That is correct.
But the laws have changed now so that when people do genetic testing for their ancestry or other reasons, you have to opt in for the police to access those tests, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And is that something, that seems like a mistake to me. Do you have any perspective on that? Because that would really help solve a lot of cold cases, wouldn't it?
Well,
if you were automatically opted in and you had to opt out if you didn't want to have it.
Sure, and most certainly if law enforcement had access to the largest genealogy databases like Ancestry.com and 23andMe, there could be many more cases solved. Law enforcement right now, there's 2 genealogy websites that permit law enforcement to search them to help solve cases. And what you are talking about is that when people upload their DNA profiles into these databases, Family Tree DNA and GEDmatch, they have to explicitly opt in and say, yes, I want law enforcement to be able to search against my DNA profile to see if a relative of mine is potentially involved in an unsolved case. These other genealogy websites, such as Ancestry, refuse law enforcement access. And there has been discussion if law enforcement could compel them, either through a federal grand jury subpoena or a state warrant or something like that, But the reality is because of the sensitivity of the issue, and there's a lot of misperception about genetic privacy that people just don't understand. There really is very, very. I, as a law enforcement officer, never had access to anybody's genetic information in these genealogy websites. I just get information about how much DNA they share with the person, like the Golden State Killer I'm looking for, and that tells me how far back in time I need to build family trees using public record information like census records and obituaries and findagrave.com in order to be able to utilize the tool. But right now, we know, like when I talk to law enforcement, part of it is don't upset the apple cart. We now are 7 years post Golden State Killer. We've seen great successes with this tool, and we don't need somebody to do something stupid, which now we have legislators that are going to come in and further restrict law enforcement's access.
Okay. I was going to ask if you thought it would worth a push to reverse that, but okay. I uploaded my genetic data and my kids from Ancestry to the common pool and opted in. And I had a detective from Toronto call about a cold case.
Well, I've literally had, I know of 2 cases in which the one was Othram telling me that my DNA profile was a distant match to somebody that was from the evidence, and then San Diego hit me up and said, "Hey, your name popped up," So, and at that point, I hadn't opted in because I put mine up well before this change requiring the opt-in. And so this female investigator out of San Diego was like, "Turn yours on so I can figure out what your family tree is," right?
A lot of secrets hidden in some family trees. All right, what is your question?
I want to know who the Clark County Sheriff was at the time, and is that person that did not believe you still alive?
Yes, James Pillsbury is still alive, and I don't know who the Clark County Sheriff was at the time. Sorry about that.
We talked to Pillsbury for the podcast, and he came right up to the line of some maybe a little shame and responsibility, but then pulled back at the end. He just
I had to shame him into that with
Yeah.
Martha's trial. He came up to me in the waiting area outside and made some comment about the case, and then I just thought I'm so bad with names and faces and keeping it for all those years in my head that I had no idea who he was. And of course, you're a part of this, so my heart is with you. And I said, "Oh, if only I could have made him believe me." And he says, No, honey, that was me. I did believe you. And that I just pulled back and looked at him and turned around and walked away. And I think he understood that I knew he didn't. So I wish my sister had heard the same thing because she was there that night. So, yeah, I think I kind of helped shame him into that. And I'm glad.
Yeah, me too.
What is your question? Someone.
I was just going to say, wasn't Eugene Cotton the sheriff? Or am I wrong back then?
A long time ago, Denny.
Yeah.
Yes. That is correct. All right, what is your question?
So I have a profile on Ancestry.com and 23andMe. Tell me what I need to do to make sure my DNA is available to law enforcement. I will do it tonight.
Sure. So all these genealogy websites allow you to be able to download your own DNA profile. And all it is it's a text file. And so you can download that file and go to genmatch.com and then create an account, and you can upload it and opt in, and now your DNA can be searched. That profile can be searched to see if somebody related to you is somebody that law enforcement is looking for.
Is there any way that, Michelle, you can send us a link to where we can upload that?
Well, is GenMatch a private company or is it a government organization?
GenMatch was acquired by, at the time, this was a company known as Verigen, and now this is it's a huge multi-billion-dollar company called QIAGEN, which is a scientific instrument company or scientific supply company, and then Family Tree DNA, which is the other site, and I'm a little bit dated in my knowledge. I'm not sure there's an upload capacity in Family Tree DNA, but that is now, in essence, being run by Othram, the company that I'm employed by.
We should mention that Paul came all the way from California to be with us tonight, so that was...
Thank you.
Actually, Colorado Springs.
Oh, Colorado Springs.
I came from California, man. Come on.
You came from California. Where's...
Thank you.
Star did come from...
Whoa. Hawaii.
Hawaii.
Yeah.
I came from Brush Prairie. There was... Okay, what's your question?
My question's more about the podcast itself, especially in light of where that you're not local. How did you discover this story, and how did you choose to tell this story?
You know, I was told about this story because I was doing a regional true crime podcast at the time. I had been a reporter at Cairo Radio and wanted to get into podcasting after I heard the Cold podcast, which if you haven't heard or listened to it, it's amazing. And along this journey, I heard the name Warren Forrest, and I was like, I'm surprised, because I live near Seattle, and I was surprised that I'd never heard the name Warren Forrest. But then, as I kind of dug into it, and I, of course, Star and Norma, like you, many of you, when I saw Norma, I just couldn't believe. I was like, how was she not believed? And Star, with her tenacity for her sister, you know, I'm a little sister. I was really close with my sister. And it just kind of struck me really deeply about this bond, and especially with them being foster kids, and what that meant to lose that and to be denied. Like, I'm always attracted to stories where people just don't give up. They have grit, especially, you know, women, you know, in the face of all of these things. Nothing against men, but women and children, when they're not believed, it's just, it raises something within me, and both of these women were just my inspiration. And so it took me probably about 8 months, and Dan can attest to this, to really understand the interworkings of the case, and then how to tell the story. Our partners, KSL Podcasts, Lemonada Media, you know, I always mention them because it really has taken a village. And of course, my producing partner, Brandon, who's always like, he's cracking jokes and he's saying how Cat 344, but like, there's a lot that's gone on behind the scenes about like how we put the show together. You know, when we were dealing with the Pillsbury part, like, he asked the unthinkable of me, which was to write it from his perspective as a young, what we knew about him. And I couldn't, like, I almost choked. I was like, okay, let me try to do a different perspective here. And it's those kinds of things, because you're looking at context, you're looking at telling both sides of a story, not just telling one narrative. I think that that's really important to me. So for all of those reasons, podcasting as a vehicle to tell these stories is really important, and I'm really proud of the work that we've done. And it really took all of us here, and you all here tonight. We actually have Alicia and Josh from the Murder in the Rain podcast. I reached out to them because I didn't know anyone in Portland. I was like, hey, brothers and sisters, help me promote this so we can get as many people as possible. And they did. And Alicia had an amazing idea for, you know, the Golden State Killer. Paul, we were talking about this earlier, about how you and Michelle maybe set that up.
Right. So, you know, the Golden State Killer case, you know, of course, at the time that I found it in 1994, it was a serial rape case in Northern California, Sacramento, Central Valley, etc., and he was known as the East Area Rapist. And we had always shortened, from the very beginning, law enforcement had always shortened East Area Rapist to EAR, or EAR, right? So it's not very descriptive. Well, in this series, this offender moved down to Southern California, and he was known as the Night Stalker. He was going into houses and bludgeoning couples. Well, then Richard Ramirez happened, right? And he became known as the Night Stalker. So D'Angelo became rebranded as the original Night Stalker down there, even though they didn't know it was related to the East Area Rapist until I connected those two in 2001. So now we have East Area Rapist Ear and original Night Stalker ONS. So now he was being called, with the online community, Ear-ons. What does that mean, right? So
it rolls off the tongue.
So a true crime blogger became fascinated with the case, and she ended up writing an article for Los Angeles Magazine. And during the course of writing that article, I became she ended up being somebody that I was communicating with routinely, even though I was kind of standoffish. I was like Joe Friday. And I was giving her some information, but then ultimately I kind of divulged some sensitive information about my investigation off the record. And then ultimately the article came out, and she proved herself. And Michelle and I became very close for 3 years until she tragically passed away in her sleep. But in that Los Angeles Magazine article, she basically was like, Paul, I'm going to name him the Golden State Killer. And I was just like, don't do that. We've already got East Area Rapist. We've already got Original Night Stalker. We've got Ear. We have ONS or ONS. We have Ear-ons. And then there was a question, was he Visalia Ransacker or VR? I was like, no, don't do it. But ultimately, that moniker is what the general public goes, hold on, Golden State, California, right, statewide killer. It was descriptive of the magnitude and the scope of D'Angelo's crimes, even though at the time it was an unsolved case. And so that's, I think, going to lead into sort of the next phase of this presentation, right?
Yeah, so Alicia, if you want to talk a little bit about some ideas. Sure.
Come on down.
Dan.
Yeah, come on up.
Yeah.
And Alicia,
come right here.
and she did a bang-up job on AM Northwest with Helen and Carolyn, so thank you.
Yeah, it's been an honor. Carolyn, again, thank you so much, and everyone. You guys have been so amazing. I kind of knew the name Warren Forrest, like I think a lot of us did, hearing about the DNA connecting to a serial killer from the 70s, and it was like, okay. And then Carolyn wrote me about this event, and then I looked into it and thought, oh my God, this is amazing. Like the work she has done, the steps that are being taken with Paul and everybody, it's really incredible. So we did kind of a companion piece where it's like, start with Murder in the Rain, and you'll get a 2-episode synopsis of like the tiniest nutshell of all of this information. Then you listen to Stolen Voices, and you hear everything, and the powerful interviews with everybody involved. So Josh and I, my co-host, we were talking, and just like Paul was saying, he was like, you hate to say it because of the context, but you need marketing, you need branding, you need that identifiable.
NWK.
Yes, exactly. Always NWK.
It pays to advertise.
Exactly, and it does encompass everything, and it is kind of a known thing that almost like a status of like, this is someone to be looking at. If they have this nickname and he wants to be in the shadows. He didn't write letters to the cops. He didn't say my name is whatever spooky thing that he thought was cool. This guy wants to hide, and he's getting older, and he wants to just go off in peace. And that's why we were talking about hashtag Warren Forrest. You were saying you were getting interviewed, and you said, no, you're going to say his name. We are not letting him get away with this. This is not about protecting. This is about elevating and getting him in front of people. So we were talking about what would that be. So I went home last night and I was like, Josh, we're talking about this. He's like, well, with Paul Holes and then Forrest being great, what about Emerald State Killer? I'm like, well, that's really not that bad. But there are so many elements. There's the dart gun, there's the hose, there's the blue van, there's so many things.
I was thinking blue-eyed killer, too.
That, too. So, yeah.
So this is related to our contest. So, Michelle.
Yep. Watch your emails. I'm taking to the 5th on this one right now because strategy is everything, and we're being filmed, so we don't want him to know what we're doing. Ask the question.
In awe of, you people doing as much as you've done to bring this to light. And I'm just, in the 70s, I remember, I'm 78 years old, and in the 70s, who cared about women?
especially
Exactly.
the police. I've had it. I've had more than one time that I was just dismissed because you're just a woman, big deal.
Yep.
And it just made me angry, and I just wanted to express my.
Thank you
Yes,
very much.
And it still goes on
It
every
still
day.
goes on, yeah, and
Thank you.
I'm just really proud of you that you've done what you've done, and to bring it to my. I didn't know about it. I didn't live out here then, and I'm just really, really happy that you did it and brought it to my attention, and just wanted to thank you very much for it.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm glad you're there to
Dan,
help.
any
So for the detectives in the group, I'm wondering what role AI is starting to play in the research as a tool for law enforcement and for the work that you do.
Yeah, this is kind of we're on sort of the cusp of how AI can be used, and I'm focusing in not talking in law enforcement in general, but let's say these unsolved cases. And now the ability, obviously with 1970s cases, was all paper, handwritten sometimes, and you have to be able to scan it, digitize it, but now there's AI aspects that can digest this information and possibly see linkages that us as a human don't necessarily make. A Golden State Killer, you combine all the case files together, that was 15,000 pages. How do you keep track of all of that data? So that's where I can kind of see where AI is going to be coming in. I know like what I do, in terms of crime scene reconstructions and really kind of going after the harder cases to see what we can do to solve the case. I don't know how AI is going to impact something like that. Right now, I'd like to say there's always going to need to be somebody who has developed experience and expertise versus just turning it over to a computer. But who knows? I could be replaced someday.
I think we're going. That's the end of the Q&A. Correct.
correct?
One more. Do we want to do
Thank
one more?
you. Somebody that hasn't gone wants to ask a question? Because we got to wrap it up.
Yeah, we're going into overtime here, and
While we wait, if anyone that didn't get tickets and they're watching on the live stream and they want to be part of your exciting contest, how could they go about doing that?
Follow facebook.com/NWCave and get all the juicy tidbits there.
all right, real quick.
Oh, okay, thanks. Mine's more of a comment, less of a question, but I grew up in Battleground. We moved there in 1980. My dad worked for the Forest Service. We lived on Mount St. Helens until the mountain erupted, and then we had to move, and that's how we ended up in Battleground. But I wanted to say, growing up there as a kid, all the way through 18 years old of high school, I never had heard of this story. Never, not one time.
Nobody back then
You would
did.
think that, like, Warren Forrest or the Boogeyman or...
Honestly, this is just supposition on my part. I think his parents had some kind of pull somewhere to keep it quiet, to keep it under the radar, to get a prosecutor to sign off on a horrendous event and make it disappear.
His mother was really good friends with the Governor Dixie of the state of Washington. And yeah.
How does a person plead not guilty by reason of insanity for doing what he did to that young woman and then just have free run of a mental hospital? Come and go as he pleases, go to his doctor's house and have dinner, paint his house.
Yeah. His family had power.
Yeah.
That's all there was to it.
That's why you've never heard of it in the 80s. Even as Dan Tilken said, he searched the files on two
Yeah, as far as I can tell, the
station.
Columbian is the only media that covered it. The 74 trial and 79. I don't think.
I didn't find out about him until 2004 when I hit my 40s and decided.
And that's what I mean when I say he just wants to live in the dark. He's lived his life in prison, and it is prison, but he's lived a pretty good life for somebody who's in prison.
Until Martha's trial.
Yes.
And we were vocal and we were all over the media. And people in his prison found out about him. And they moved him.
So media matters. I'm
And he
sorry.
got beat up, and I'm so-
I'm glad you said it. I was trying to avoid it.
If she hadn't, I would have. I do not
But
feel
he's
bad
been
about
moved
it.
and doesn't want to go back to where all the guys now know what he's done.
So I want to make sure that
50
all the
years.
guys where he's at now find out what he's
Hashtag
done.
Warren Forrest. Thank you, Mr. Tilkin. Dan, you rock. It really,
Thank
really
you.
rocks. Let's thank all of our guests. So I'm going to close because Norma mentioned, how does someone claim not guilty by reason of insanity and goes off to Washington State? I just received a text. We're on 5 murder cases, and one of our clients just texted me. She met with the prosecutor's office tonight at 5 o'clock. If you know Star Murrah, and she was stabbed to death by her estranged husband in front of their 8-year-old son, and we were all over the news on that case after 3 attorneys, 3 counseling sessions. Somebody finally said he was insane, and so he got not guilty by reason of insanity. He went to Washington State, June of 2024, and he's now done all of his homework, and they're letting him out. So on Wednesday, there is a hearing, and I hope and pray Judge Clark, who slapped him with a life restraining order against his son, that he, and that's a particular case again, where the system is failing the victims and their families. And so I'm going to close with what we do, because their investigation, they do the work at first. When police drop a whole case on prosecutors' desks, prosecutors need to prosecute and then stick it to them. Somebody just killed their roommate and got only 18 years. Laws have to change. We are working, our policy director is here. We've been talking about things with Starr's family. Why is it not guilty by reason of insanity? You're freaking guilty. You may be saying you're insane, but you set up the murder with the judge dropping off evidence and then murdered your ex-wife. You're not insane when you do that. And to this day, it's those cases. I don't care if it was the 70s or 2025. The system is broken. And unless we talk about it, we can listen to all the podcasts in the world. And let me tell you about podcasts. I watch SVU because I'm in partnership with the Joyful Heart Foundation of Mariska Hargitay. So I like that show. Those are true stories. However, I can tell you right now, I don't sit there and listen to podcasts. My favorite is Spotlight for Justice, our podcast, our radio show on KXRW. But when a podcast goes to air, unless it's somebody you've never heard from before, let me tell you, we have to investigate, we have to double check, we have to make sure both parties are in the know, so we stay neutral. And whether you're a podcaster, you're a reporter, you're an investigative journalist, whatever your genre of media is, we can't be held liable because we have to speak truth with evidence. And when it airs, you better believe that people have done their homework. And there are many people, even in this community, who believe some podcasters are there for entertainment. And I can tell you, if it's a true crime podcast, they're doing their homework, just like this team here. And so with that, I say We have to be vocal. We have to stop being hypocrites. I've been saying this in speeches for the last 2 months, especially this town. I make a living here, I live here, I love it, I play here, but damn it, there are a lot of hypocrites in this town. If you're against rape, why are you re-victimizing a victim on social media? If you're against murder and you believe these folks, why aren't you sharing, hey, why didn't we know about this? We have to, as a community, if we want to live in a community that's safe, we must stand by our principles. And it doesn't matter who you're hurting. I'll either die of a heart attack or somebody, some perpetrator, will take their aggravations out on me. Because I'm going to call you out on your shit. I'm sorry, could I say that on YouTube? And it's so hard to build the relationships. It's so hard. Media relationships. Media, FBI, police, sheriff's offices, all of that. Every jurisdiction acts differently. Trust me, I've been in Eufaula, Alabama. Where's the Alabama lady? Yep, you're in the back. Alabama cold case unit is in the back. You know, so when we know this, we can attend these all we want, but if you leave here and you don't share this story of survival and perseverance and strength, and nobody talks about what they go through. Perpetrators, no matter what genre of violence, gets your tax dollars for a free attorney. But when somebody needs to be seen and heard, they have to pay for an attorney. What's wrong with that? And they live in a lifetime of hell while our tax dollars buys room and board for somebody. That is sad. That is just sad. And we need to change that. We can't change that if we don't fight for the laws to be changed too. So we've given you a lot of information on this particular case. And like I said, our agency is on 5 cases. We represent the victims and or their families. And that comes with a lot of things that we may do for them. Like a vigil for Jamie, you know, or having an event like this. And I hope we do more. And I can tell you one thing I've learned about doing an event like this, we'll rent out the entire ballroom so we won't hear anybody else. So, and there will be more of these, trust me, because there are 3 high-profile cases we're on, including stars at this point, where we're going to need this team again. We're going to need them because if mainstream media doesn't get it out there, these folks will, and it will make people stand up and do something. And that's what we are all about. We have a dream, a world without violence. And if we all stick with that, we won't be waiting 54 years for answers. And that just can't happen anymore. Nobody should have to live that long to not know what happened.
Thank you, Michelle.
So, any last words, Paul?
No, I having worked cold cases, you know, for as long as I have, I think what we're witnessing here tonight is that I've seen within law enforcement, I've even heard forensic staff say something, well, they've waited this long, they can continue to wait. Mm-hmm. And these are people that are not interacting with the families and the victims that have actually suffered at, you know, the horrific acts of these offenders. And I think it just really underscores tonight that for the families and for the victims, It may have been 50 years, but it's like it was yesterday. And us as public servants, we have a responsibility to those families to get an answer and to see if justice can be sought.
Brandon? From Los Angeles.
Yeah, from LA. Hey, thank you, man. Great job, Dan.
And what was your quote yesterday? I was really taken by that quote about the fishing.
Oh no, about why it's important to put some pressure on Forrest, because say what you will about him, but he's smart, because he's not vocal about what he does. He wants to be left alone. And I just said, the thing I grew up with in Jersey, the fish who keeps his mouth shut never gets hooked. So right, so he's been smart about it. So let's make his life as hard as we can. Yeah. What's left of it.
Amen.
So
hashtag Warren Forrest.
Hashtag
2
Warren
R's.
Forrest.
2 R's.
I want to thank everybody for coming out and for supporting the podcast and
Send him little postcards.
Yeah, we'll end with that. Dan, any last thoughts?
Star and I, one of the things we're most proud of is we got his conjugal visits taken away.
Which shouldn't be a thing on our tax dollars.
Which should not have been a thing.
Cut it off,
Remember that?
Yeah.
It's been
the visits, everything.
8 years.
Oh, no, I meant the visits. Carolyn, any last thoughts?
I just want to really thank Michelle for doing such a great job, and she has really, when we talk about Spitfire, this woman has been dashing here, dashing there, and it's just been incredible to partner with you, to be a part of it. And of course, I have to say, KSL Podcasts, Lemonade Media, they do so much. So it's been such a honor to be telling through them their stories. And of course, as I said, Brandon and Paul Holes, thank you so much, everybody, for being here.
Alicia?
Thank you.
Oh, this isn't my thing. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for reaching out. This is great. Thank you.
No, but it is everybody's thing. That's the beauty of it.
Norma, any last thoughts?
Thank you. Thank you for your support, and thank you again for being here, and hashtag Warren Forrest, 2 R's.
And write to him. Send him a little love note.
Star's not
Tell him
allowed
the
to
truth.
write him because
Or-
she's a victim.
Or
you all can.
But we can.
You can become pen
and say,
pals.
oh, you should see what Star's doing today.
You can become pen pals with other prisoners where he is currently housed,
Oh, that's
and tell them
Post
what
right.
he has done. I have no idea. Vine
I
did
know,
not
Vine
contact
never
me
let
to let
them.
me know.
Yeah.
I'm going to be on their case tomorrow.
We
to
were
find
supposed
out.
to be notified, and we weren't.
You can, there's a website, just Google Washington State Department of Corrections Inmate Finder, and you'll find it.
All right. Well, thank you. There's food in the back. The bar is still open. And remember, get your photos taken and come and see our guests today. Thank you so much.